It's so important to have an optimistic mindset. COVID-19 is a challenge that we all need to adapt to. And I also take the view that the pandemic and distance learning is not a disaster to higher education for which you need to suffer from. I really believe that suffering is a choice. It is a state of mind.
I think a lot of this starts with being able to accept the current reality. And when we talk about adaptability, it's about coming to a place of acceptance. It's also about the language we use. So if we're saying things like, oh my gosh, my experience of university is never going to be the same again, I'm not going to get what I need, we have to reframe our language and think, okay, what are the positives about my situation?
I think visiting a psychologist can be stigmatizing. And it's always a question how to be positive when we have to face with a challenge. This is a good method. This is what you should do with the problems. Cut them into small pieces.
About 1/3, not quite half of students managed to get through this crisis quite well, and the others had multiple issues. Write down the areas that I can control and that I can't control, like for example the coronavirus. Partial that out of your life because that's of no use.
There is nothing wrong with stress itself. The problem is if we cannot handle the large amount of stress, if the stress is too much in our life.
Our ability to be proactive and resilient, these are things that are in our hands and they are actually completely independent of our circumstances.
I think after this period, it's so important to share our knowledge, share our experiences, and develop good and best practices around this. This is what was done centuries ago, and this is why all the universities in the world look more or less the same.
Hello and welcome everybody to this webinar on mastering the psychology of distance learning. My name is Craig Johnson. I am the co-founder of Gile, and I will be moderating this session here today. And as the title suggests, we're going to explore some of the psychological challenges that students and educators typically face as a result of the pandemic, as well as distance learning, of course. If you're new to our webinars, you should know that we always try and make a point to share some really concrete advice and provide you with practical things that you can do, exercises or whatever, so that you can still achieve a rich learning experience with distance learning or blended learning, whatever eventually happens in the next academic semester or academic year. So yes, please do get your notebooks out and please ask the questions. I'm sure by now you know the drill. There's a chat box there. There's also a Q&A section. So please send them to us. I will do my best to essentially integrate them into the conversation. And we're going to try to do things a bit differently because we want to give more space for questions. So please do send this to us. And we're also going to try to take video questions. So if you're brave enough, please just text us in the Q&A section. And then we have a team at the back that will just contact you and get you ready to pop up on screen. So the reason we chose this topic is that our foundation has actually been somewhat overwhelmed with requests for additional support and psychological advice, especially when it comes to coping with distance learning. And I'm really glad that we actually got a panel here today at relatively short notice, a fantastic panel that can actually share some of their insights. We're going to be hearing a lot from them, but if I had to just, throw my 2 cents in, the way I see it is that it's so important to have an optimistic mindset. COVID-19 is a challenge that we all need to adapt to. And I also take the view that the pandemic and distance learning is not a disaster to higher education for which you need to suffer from. I really believe that suffering is a choice. It is a state of mind. So on that note, I think let's get started and right into it. I'll begin by introducing Dr. Janusz Kolar. He's a clinical psychologist, an associate professor, and the head of counseling service for English-speaking students at Chote Medical University, which is in Hungary. And Janusz is also the founder of Kolar Training. Dr. Janusz, welcome.
Thank you very much, Craig. I think it was a very good point of view when you started. Let's consider this virus outbreak as a challenge. Actually, it is. And it's always a question how to be positive when we have to face with a challenge. I think the most difficult thing is, and everybody experiences this, is the uncertainty. We don't know how did it break. We don't know how long it will take. We don't know what will happen in the next semester. But nevertheless, it's completely true that we had to face a lot of challenges, and we learned a lot, not just regarding the human connections, but regarding a lot of technological connections. For example, the Zoom, what we use right now. I wasn't familiar with this Zoom before the virus outbreak, and I myself also learned a lot.
Yes.
So,
Fantastic. We're definitely going to get into all of that, where you can then share exactly how you've been managing the counseling and the advice and how you adapted. That's a topic that we're going to look at, adaptability and resilience. If I had to also just go ahead and introduce some of our other speakers as well. We've also joined by another psychologist, Kishpal Gergely. He is a counselor at Corvinus University in Hungary, and he also works in private practice at Thyros Psychotherapy Center. And interesting thing to note is that Gergely's first undergraduate degree in psychology was actually through distance learning. So it's a nice combination between the two. So it will be interesting to hear from him. So Gergely, welcome.
Thank you.
And yes, our last guest is Emma Sue Prince. She is the founder of Unimenta, which is based in the United Kingdom. Emma is a trainer, an author, and an employability consultant. So she's going to bring a nice, different perspective, equally meaningful, and aligned to her latest book, which is called The 7 Skills for the Future, which was published last year by Pearson Business. So Emma, welcome.
Thank you.
So yes, again, I hate to repeat, but it's always important to remind you guys, please share your questions in the Q&A and please answer the poll. You would have seen that was just launched a moment ago. And yes, I think that's enough talking from me. So I think as a general introduction, we've heard a little from Janos. Perhaps we can hear, just general introduction to the topic from you, Gergely, with regards to psychology and distance learning. And then I'll ask Emma also to comment from her side.
Okay, thanks. Well, I think as Janos already, the poll is coming up here on my screen, sorry. So as Janos already mentioned, I think, and what we saw is like in March and the beginning of April, that we were all kind of surprised and overwhelmed by this. And what we did at our university is we decided not to just guess, but to know what our students and our potential clients as counselors are up to. So we did a large-scale survey among students, and based on that, we could plan, design interventions or adapt existing forms of intervention to the situation. Because, for example, we do a lot of, or usually do a lot of group work, group counseling, and of course this was no longer possible. It was, for those who are not from Hungary, the universities were closed in mid-March, like the buildings were literally closed. Students were not allowed to enter the buildings. So all of the usual work of a psychologist and a counselor was gone, like from one day to the other. So we had to adapt quickly, and we luckily managed to, via this survey, we managed to have like reliable data about how our students are and what the biggest challenges were for them in this quite surprising situation.
Yes. We're going to look at those statistics and have a look. Emma, from your side, I know you may not be involved with universities per se, but you also do a lot of work with young people and obviously with the corporate as well. How do you take the whole distance situation?
Well, I think for me, we have to look at our well-being first, and skills like well-being and our ability to be proactive and resilient. These are things that are in our hands, and they are actually completely independent of our circumstances. And I think this can be really challenging to grasp when we're right in the middle of uncertainty and crisis, and especially when we've got something looming up that is completely different and new, and we don't know what it's going to be like. But I know 100% from all the people I work with around the world and from my own experiences over the past few months, that actually we have great capacity to develop and nurture these skills. And this starts with actually accepting our current reality. And most of the time, you know, we resist change, we want to control change, but we are actually a lot more resilient and adaptable than we might think we are. We've been developing these skills big time in the last few months. And, you know, I just believe we are living in a unique time, and one that for me is demanding that we rise up and we become and we be the very best of ourselves.
Okay.
So it's exciting. It's an exciting time.
Yes, and that mindset, we need to get people engaged into that optimism, which is something that you also sort of teach as one of the 7 skills.
Yes.
So everybody, you would have seen that we shared the poll results a moment ago. That's just to get a sense of how you individually manage the transition. It's fair to say that majority found it relatively more challenging. And if you look at the second question, many of you, most of you, by the far majority, have not previously seen a psychologist or counselor. So perhaps, Janusz, maybe you can comment on that second question. Is it typical that people are, or they have their reasons, or they maybe, you know, whether it comes to seeing a counselor or a psychologist, I'm sure that's a common practice?
Well, I think visiting a psychologist can be stigmatizing. For example, in Hungary, we have this situation. Of course, it depends on the culture, it depends on the country, if visiting a psychologist is stigmatizing or not. But for example, these circumstances when everybody was at home made it even more difficult. Even if somebody wanted to contact with an expert, with a therapist, it made more difficult. As far as myself, and I think it's the same, we like more the personal contact. Like everybody else. And of course, I work also with internet. I use Skype and Zoom and something for in therapies, but it is not the same.
Yeah.
It makes a huge difference. So this is also a disadvantage of this situation.
Okay. Yes, I mean, Gergely, I want to bring you in here so that we can start getting deeper into the issues that a lot of the students deal with in particular, which is what you alluded to earlier on. Perhaps you can also just comment also from the survey, and I can also just bring up and then also just talk about the survey you did at Corvinus University, and then we can sort of pull up the stats and you can just elaborate on some of those figures.
Yes. Where do participants see that?
Yes, now I'll bring that up in a moment.
Okay, cool.
Just maybe comment on the poll. Is that something you expected? Is that in line and consistent with what you experienced through your counseling?
Yes. Well, you know, so this survey was divided into 3 parts. One was about mental well-being, mental health issues. The other was about career perspectives, and the third part was about studying and how do we do distance learning. So yeah, and this is actually consistent with the 3 divisions of our counseling center at Corvinus University. And well, it was more or less what we expected, but
I'm just going to pop it up here so the viewers can see the survey.
Cool.
You're referring to.
So I just, you know, this is very basic. There were like about 30 questions, some of which were qualitative, so people had to write. And I just gathered some of the more interesting data. So the highest percentage of all questions through all 30 questions was like almost 80% worried about their loved one's health. And this was particularly so for foreign students, most of whom stayed in Hungary, pretty much isolated. But this was, you know, more about family. When we go more into like studying and you know, how am I as a student, then we see that like 73% struggle with time management. So how do I structure my day when there's no schedule that I have to follow, and I don't have to be in room A at this time and room B at this time, but I have to figure this out for myself. So this was quite obvious, and I think strongly connected to this is this next bullet point, which says about half of the students had difficulties finding or keeping up the motivation. So I think these two are like at the core of what we talk about when we talk about the difficulties of distance learning. Like, I have to motivate myself, I have to structure my day, and nobody does it for me. Yeah.
Okay.
And then the other is, report interpersonal conflicts. This is probably a Hungarian speciality. What happened in our country is that all student dormitories were closed and the students had to move out. So most of them moved back home to their parents. And they, of course, experienced different difficulties getting back into the role of a child. And then career-wise, yes, about 1/5 of students lost their job, which at Corvinus University, which has a strong focus on business and economy degrees, might not just mean a student, the odd student job at a cafe, but like serious internships, jobs, paid internships and jobs. So we saw a lot of worries there, like, will I be able to have a career afterwards? Or continue after the pandemic. And then the latter is just, it's more like the mental health part. Like 5% of our students were doing really badly, which means like this is the psychiatry level. So they were heavily affected, and these are all connected. So those who were really seriously depressed also reported more difficulties, of course, with the time management, with the motivation. So this is kind of interlinked. So we see that about 1/3, not quite half of the students managed to get through this crisis quite well, and the others had multiple issues. So there were a few people who had just problems in one area and otherwise were doing fine, but this was all intertwined. So it seemed that those who are vulnerable anyway, they had a very, very difficult time during these past months, which affected their study results ultimately. So it's not just about well-being, but it's also about, in the end, it's about what will be written on my degree. Will I have an A, a B, or whatever, which again might affect their careers in later years.
Yes. A lot of that has to do with adaptability and resilience. And before we bring Emma Sue into the picture, I know you mentioned that about over 1,000 people completed the survey at Corvinus. What I'm particularly curious about is, has it changed significantly pre-COVID-19 and now post? Because it seems to me that many of these issues are consistent whether COVID happened or not. Has there been a radical shift in the percentages? So, for example, can you say that 20% struggled with time management before COVID, and now it's spiked to 73%, for example?
Well, is that a question for Emma Sue or for
No, it's for you. It's for you. I'm just
unfortunately, we didn't see this pandemic coming, so we didn't ask our students the same questions before. So we don't have a pre-post measurement. We only have this, and this is beginning of April.
Okay.
Level. So it would be interesting to see what is now. We might do that if we are bored during the summer. And it would have been very interesting, indeed, as you asked, Craig, how it was before. My educated guess is that those who were struggling anyway are struggling now as well, or even a bit more. But it seems as though, of course, see that the top bullet point, worrying about their loved one's health, this is certainly increasing. I would say, and I think everyone agrees that this is specific to this pandemic situation. Right. But I would think that if half of students had difficulties finding or retaining motivation, they might have had this issue anyway, but the current situation just brings it out more blatantly, if you know what I mean. So I would think this is about general vulnerability, resilience, or low-high resilience. So I would be surprised if these numbers were significantly different from before, but we don't have reliable data on that.
Okay.
Just a lot of things that when you go to university regularly, you take exams, they're written exams, or even oral exams when you just, if you're good at, chit chat, and, explaining things, and you're good verbally, then you can make your way through a verbal examination, which you can't do here. So I would think that a lot of issues were covered by, going to university, which come out more blatantly now because you just sit isolated at home.
Okay. No, makes sense. Before we start talking about the solutions from a stress management perspective and all the activities and exercises you give to the students, I would like Emma Sue to also comment from an adaptability and resilience sort of angle, because you do a lot of those trainings, being proactive, and all of that is linked to well-being. Do you want to just comment on the connection there?
Yeah, I mean, so I think a lot of this starts with being able to accept the current reality. And when we talk about adaptability, it's about coming to a place of acceptance. And I think acceptance is often misinterpreted as a kind of apathy or, indifference, but actually it's not. It's about embracing the current reality. That's where your power lies. But you need to first of all acknowledge how you might be feeling. So that's quite important, that, you're going to feel frustrated, you're going to feel at a loss, you're going to feel really kind of up and down. And I think with resilience, resilience isn't about being this amazingly strong person who can just kind of handle anything and be really tough. Resilient people actually have a lot of tools and strategies that they use to help them to be resilient. So the connection between adaptability and being proactive and being resilient is quite strong. If you're proactive, you're always moving towards something, and if you're proactive, you're placing your energy onto the things that you can control. And unfortunately, what happens is when we are dealing with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of, anxiety, and I completely agree with what's being said in terms of people who might suffer from anxiety anyway, this is just going to be really exacerbated by this situation. But even if you don't suffer from anxiety, and I can speak for myself, you're going to have times when you feel anxious and overwhelmed, and this is completely normal. But if you can bring your focus back to the things that you can control, the small things, you feel better immediately. So for me, it's always about taking action. What are the things that I can do? What are the things I can do today? How am I going to move forward with this? So the link between these three is very strong.
Okay. Yeah, I always find it so it's easier said than done. It's difficult to get a fire burning, to get someone to actually do something about it. And I imagine that's the purpose of your training, to get people to get into that routine of doing these small exercises. Can you also maybe just comment on how you actually get people to practice adaptability?
It's a good question, because actually up until a few months ago, all our sessions were run face-to-face, and it was a completely different thing. But I would say with adaptability in particular, so adaptability is a willingness to change in response to changed circumstances. That's what adaptability is. So it's got to start with small steps. And what we always advocate in our sessions is that you've got to get yourself to a point where you can stretch to try new things. Now, what happens is we have a kind of comfort zone where we are very relaxed, where we're also very competent. And when we have change happening, we tend to go into a kind of fight or flight mode. And this will be definitely the case with this pandemic. And what we have to do is just tiny baby steps to get into stretch. And it's things like, because stretch is where you grow, it's where you learn. So you also feel uncomfortable in stretch. So we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and that means moving towards change. So it's things like, little baby steps of being proactive and adaptable will be things like, okay, what new skills do I need to learn here? Am I looking after myself? What information do I need? How am I going to get this information? I know that I can't connect with others. So I can't do things in the same way that I could before. So how am I going to boost that connection? What can I do today? You know, and it's also about the language we use. So if we're saying things like, oh my gosh, my experience of university is never going to be the same again. I'm not going to get what I need. You know, we have to reframe our language and think, okay, what are the positives about my situation? One of the things we teach on our sessions is to practice gratitude. Every day, practice gratitude. You know, what am I grateful for in this situation? There are many positives, as well as, you know, amidst all the change. And I think, you know, it's really about taking those small steps. You know, if you wake up in the morning and you feel rubbish, because, you know, if you feel rubbish, it's harder to be proactive, right? So if you feel rubbish, it's like, what do I do? How do I help myself? What is my morning routine like? You know, am I getting out in nature enough? Am I drinking enough water? You know, they did a study way before the pandemic where people would be complaining about not having any motivation in the afternoons and feeling sluggish. And they found out that actually it's because they needed to drink more water. You know, they were dehydrated. So for me, it's always about the really simple things that I can do right now that's going to help my situation.
Right. And it really is simple if you think about it. It's not rocket science. And you've said a lot there. I really love the phrase, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's really catchy, but it encapsulates basically everything that you said about adaptability. I want to shift the focus to you, Janusz. I mean, you heard a lot about gratitude, about how students get anxious and dealing with acceptance. You do a lot of exercises with stress management. Can you perhaps comment on that within the realm of distance learning? And you can then take it further to talk about some of the exercises you typically give people when you consult to assist them.
Thank you very much for the question. I'm very glad to share some exercises. Probably you know some of them, probably don't. So I try to summarize some of them. You know, when we talk about stress, most of the time we think about something very bad, something negative, although we know that stress has two faces. Actually, there is a positive stress, which is called eustress, and a negative stress, which is called distress. So when we mention stress, most of the time we talk about the distress. So there is nothing wrong with stress itself. The problem is if we cannot handle the large amount of stress, if the stress is too much in our life. And during this pandemic era, the stress is too high sometimes. So let me share some methods, what I use and what I suggest to my clients and to my students, what we all can use. A very simple one, what I like to start with relaxation. So if you know how to relax, learn it. It will save your life. It saved my life when I was a student. And I had only, let's say, 10 minutes in between two lectures or in between two practices. If you know how to relax, in about 7 minutes, you can feel like you were sleeping for 4 hours. This is fantastic. Of course, it doesn't mean that if you had two relaxation one after another, it means it was an 8-hour-long sleeping, because it's a different quality. But 7 minutes can save your life sometimes, can calm you down. Moreover, there are also 1 minute long relaxation exercise. It is something to do with time management, what you were talking about recently. Actually, when we start to learn something, at the beginning, the effectiveness is very high. And then when the time goes, it goes lower. And most of the students spend a lot of time with very low effectiveness. And the next day, they will say that, well, I was learning 12 hours yesterday. No, this is not happening. This is ridiculous. Nobody can learn 12 hours, only with very limited effectiveness. So it is also a very good trick, very good advice. If you realize that the effectiveness is going low just a little bit, take a break, a 1 minute long break. Do a 1 minute long relaxation exercise. Of course, you should open the window, or it can be even a physical exercise for 1 minute to gain some energy. And then the effectiveness will go back. So in much shorter period of time, people can learn much more. Let me share another method. I confess my first degree, before I became a clinical psychologist, my first degree is agricultural engineer. It's a little bit different. So I learned a lot about cows, how cows digest the food. I don't want to go into details. This is not the topic for today, but this is exactly the same what we do sometimes with problems. So we swallow them and it comes back, and we chew again and we swallow them and it comes back and we chew again. So there is a good method how to avoid this situation. It is called the constructive worrying. I know it sounds very stupid, constructive worrying, but this is true. This is a great method. I don't mind if you write down. I mean the participants. If you, there are just some steps, very easy steps. First, if you realize that there are some thoughts what you cannot digest, what is disturbing for you, first write them down. Write them down. Let it out. So write down to a piece of paper, to an exercise book, whatever. Number two, sacrifice some minutes per day. It's up to you. When you will deal with those problems. This is called the time of worrying, or the worrying hour, or the worrying minutes, whatever you call. And then you should read those things, what makes you worried. And try, number three, try to cut them to little pieces. I always ask my students how to eat a bicycle. And they are surprised, how to eat a bicycle is impossible. Of course it's possible. Yeah. If you cut them to very small pieces of this is not a homework, so don't try at home. Nevertheless, this is a good method. This is what you should do with the problems. Cut them into small pieces. And then number four, I hope everybody has a diary. So write down, today I will do this, tomorrow I will do that, and so on, and so on, and so on. The small steps. What should be measured? This is very important. So nobody can measure if I decide I want to be a better person. This is not measurable. But if I say, for example, I decide that I will visit my neighbor once a week because she lives alone and she's an elderly lady, it is measurable. So write them down, cut them into measurable pieces, write them into your calendar and check. It will help you to digest the so-called undigestible. And Emerson mentioned the gratitude. This is very, very important. So for reframing the situation. There is also a very good exercise I suggest to my clients and students very often. This is called the stones of gratitude. It's a very easy and very enjoyable one. Whenever something makes you feel happy during the day, even the smallest thing, for example, a good shower in the morning, even a good cup of water, whatever, put something into your pocket, a small something, a small pebble, piece of paper, whatever. Well, it can be a small stone. That's why it's called the stones of gratitude. And in the evening, count those small somethings to make you remember what made you happy during the day. And this is fantastic. You can do it alone when you live alone. You can do it with your friends. You can do it with your family in the evening. And if you do it in the evening, your dream will be different. If your dream is different, your next day will be different. It also helps. And I know the time is limited, but may I have just one more. I'm a music therapist as well, so don't forget about music. Very important. Music can change your mood. It is it's really important. What kind of music do you listen in the morning when you wake up? And now there are a lot of music services what you can use free of charge or with a very small amount of money, paying very small amount of money. And they can make you, or even you can make yourself, nice compilations of music, what you like, what gives you energy in the morning or during the day. This is also very important. There are a lot of other methods, but I don't want to waste your time. So in short, in a nutshell, this is what I wanted to say.
Yes. No, thanks for that, János. I mean, so far we've heard a lot of practical things you can do. For the most part, we understand that many people lost their usual coping mechanisms when it comes to stress specifically, but you've laid out quite a few between you and Emma, talking about relaxation, reframing, music, practicing gratitude, constructive worrying. So all of these things can be implemented within the confines of your own place. What I do want to bring in is you, Gergely, because stress is only one of many of the challenges that have been happening as a result of distance learning. It is my understanding that there's also aspects such as dealing with emotions, other types of emotions, distress, for example, or social isolation, loneliness. Do you experience a lot of students coming to you for these problems related to these sort of things? And then how do you sort of counsel them to deal with it?
Yeah, so I think at our university, which has a considerable number of international students, we saw a big difference because what you just described, Craig, about social isolation was more typical to these international students who found themselves stuck in Budapest without really knowing anyone or few people. Whereas the Hungarian students who were sent back home to their families because the dormitories closed experienced the exact opposite. They were stuck in their old family homes with their parents, sibling, dog, cat, parrot, whatever, and found themselves in situations which caused stress due to this. Being locked up with your family, not being able to have privacy, and we had lots of problems. We of course, all our counseling sessions went online, and we had several cases where students couldn't attend a session because they didn't have a place on their own, right? So they didn't have a calm room where they could sit like for 45 minutes and talk to one of us. So this was that, and the other was, yes, for many, as I mentioned, mostly foreign students, we had the isolation problems. I think what's very important is that is activity. So what we found in our survey is that about 2/3 of the students exclusively used passive coping mechanisms or methods, which mostly amounted to watching TV series, playing video games, eating, drinking, smoking, all sorts of interesting substances. And so what we advise them quite often is to look for active methods, and these baby steps that Emma Sue just mentioned. This is, I think, very important. Yes, why don't you go for a walk in the park? I asked this question to many students, and some of them didn't even realize that, yeah, well, I could actually do that. And for the international participants in Hungary, we didn't have this very severe lockdown that you couldn't like go out in the streets. You actually could, just by yourself. You were not supposed to hang out in groups. But in fact, like doing outside sports, going for a walk, cycling was in fact encouraged by the authorities even. And so did we. So just, to get your body into different positions is very important. My method of choice is psychodrama, and so I work a lot with embodiment, with the idea that if you put your body in a different position, in a different setting, then your thoughts, your emotions do change, and so we did a lot of this. It's really everyday stuff, but people forgot about this. They were stuck in this idea that, okay, I'm locked up here, so I'm locked up here. But I said, no, the fact that you're locked up in this country does not mean you can't go out, and you can't do exercising, you can't do just go outside and admire the sun. We had well, luckily or not, but we had very good weather during the lockdown measurements in May, especially, and so you could well go outside and just enjoy the sunlight.
Yes. No, thanks, Gergely. I want to take a pause here, and I want us to try and answer some of the questions that have been posed to us here in the chat. For example, there's a question here from Kim Morkel in Johannesburg, and it's directed at you, Emma. I don't know if you saw that one. With regards to the 7 skills that you typically train, that you obviously wrote a book about, do you differentiate or bucket them, if I can use that word loosely, between human skills and technological skills?
Well, the 7 skills that I write about are actually, all 7 of them are uniquely human, and they are things that we have inside us. So I focus on adaptability, critical thinking, empathy, integrity, being proactive, optimistic, resilient. So those are the 7 skills. But in the book and in my research that I've done, we have looked at going forward into the future, how do these skills fit in? And for sure, a lot of things that we do involve technology and will continue to involve technology, but there are certain skills that we need to keep sharpening and strengthening to make sure that we can actually handle, this was before the pandemic, by the way, but when I wrote the book, but to handle the unpredictability and the uncertainty that is in our world generally. And so these are skills like, for example, fluid thinking, being able to generate lots and lots and lots of ideas, not necessarily about the quality, but just the quantity of ideas, and being able to continually learn, our whole lives, keep learning and learning. And also some of the research that was drawn on was research into future skills 2030, not that long off, by the way, really. But Pearson, who are the publisher, they did a really interesting, I recommend, actually, I will try and make sure you have this link, but they've done this, they've got a site which is Future Skills, and they've taken current roles and professions and kind of fast forwarded them to what they would look like in 2030, and what would be uniquely human skills and what would be things that would be technological. So certain professions will, be very, very, are very, I think, are future proofed, as it were. There's certain professions, and there are some other professions that will just kind of go. But even the professions where you have a lot of digital, so healthcare, for example, there are a lot of ways now of bringing technology into healthcare. But the one thing that you cannot replicate is that human skill and the care and the nurturing. So that's I would recommend, having a look at that. But I think I would say that it's, it is, we have to build our skills. So we have to make sure that we are skilled in a number of different fields. I would say actually now we're going more into not being so generic, but actually having, a number of different things that we are actually very good at. And then around all of that, you have these 7 skills.
Okay. No, fantastic. Thanks for that, Emma. I think we have a question from Philip. I'm going to ask if we can pop him up and he can sort of pose it to one of the panelists. Philip is joining us in a moment.
Hi, Philip.
Hello all. I've got a question for all the panelists. You've mentioned previously that doing something a bit active would be a good idea, not simply passively consuming things. Obviously going outdoors is something I would approve of, but do you think maybe there is a role also for activities such as reading?
Well, as Janos mentioned, and we have the same experience, our students had a lot more to read than usual during the distance learning period, because well, that's what a lot of professors and lecturers did. They said, like, why don't you read these 500 pages today? So I think if you ask me quite honestly, they were fed up with reading, I guess, at this point. So giving them the advice, why don't you read something nice? I think they would have gotten quite angry at this point. But yeah, otherwise, yes, why not? Of course, reading can be very relaxing, just as listening to music. Of course, why not?
Okay, so following up on that, Gerge, did people complain about workload? Was this seen to be an issue?
Yes, of course they did, yeah. So both lecturers, professors, and students complained about increased amounts of workload.
Even my wife was complaining about my workload.
You were also complaining about your workload, yes. But yeah, so I think this distance learning is much more distilled way of teaching and studying from both sides. So all the like, I don't know, casual social contact is partialed out, so you have like the pure content, and this would make for increased amounts of work. But it's the same for me, I could pack many more sessions into a day because I was working from at home. So my way to my workplace was gone. My way back home was gone. A lot of other things was gone. I can eat in 10 minutes between two counseling sessions, so which is probably not very healthy. But I also, for my part, I realized that I can pack much more work into a day, which looks like efficiency, but it's in fact it can be overwhelming at one point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Gergely. May I ask one further follow-up question? This is for Emma Sue and for János, maybe simultaneously. You mentioned gratitude as being one way to keep going. Is it possible to pick up skills and make a record of that, so to actually reassure yourself that you've learnt new skills during a distance learning course?
Yes. So if I can answer first, I would say that with gratitude, it's partly about leaning into gratitude and using that as a regular practice. But there's also research that shows that if we look back at the end of the day and we reflect in a different way on the positive experiences of that day and what we've learned from that day, I think that is a really, really good thing to do. Because I think it is important to capture what we're learning. I think it is very easy because, you know, I'm sure people can identify with this, or maybe it is just me, but I feel like the days kind of merge into each other at the moment, and I often kind of don't quite know what day of the week it is. So writing, and János was talking about this before, I think writing is so powerful. You know, whether you're writing about how you feel or whether you're capturing, this is what I'm learning. Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. You can look back on that and see, look at all these different things that I've been learning. And I think because we're all having to learn so much at the moment, you know, whether it's just, you know, absorbing things and skills and all this, you know, it's easy to kind of forget how much we are learning and how much we are actually adapting, you know.
Fantastic.
Okay.
No, go for it. Please do comment.
Just two sentences, because I don't know the situation in your culture. We Hungarian people like to complain about everything, always. So even my foreign students tell me, why do you complain so much? I mean, in Hungary. And to tell you the truth, I don't know. But from this point of view, also gratitude is very important. We have to learn. We have to learn how to accept the situation, how to be thankful for something. So I think this is one of the core subjects what we should focus on.
Yes, no, fantastic. Thanks so much for that question, Philip. I'm going to try and move on to some of the other questions that we've been receiving.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Philip.
Thanks, Philip. There's a nice question here from Miriam. She's asking, the whole panel is, how do we get students committed to distance learning? So how do we motivate them? So it's the same thing of, we are aware that we should do more, but how do we, you know, that activation energy, how do we ignite that? I mean, besides handling the stress and dealing with all of these relaxations, how do we motivate people? Because distance learning will be around for some time.
May I start?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. There are several methods also. And I think this is the time when you will feel lucky to participate on this meeting, because I will tell you how to be a millionaire. Okay, so there is a great method, what is called, very simple, what is called PQRST. We teach different methods. We use the gamification when we teach students how to learn. This is one of the methods. P is previewing the material. Q is putting questions on. R is reading and finding the relevant answers to our own questions. S is self-recitation, talking about the material free, and T is test, what you make for yourself. Okay, how to be a millionaire. If you write down your questions regarding a material, and the material is difficult to learn, and you will know exactly what are the main points, and you can make a game. And this is the new area of gamification. I love it. So people can help each other by making games for learning. And first of all, you can help yourself, because you can learn the material much easier. You can help other people as well, because you can help them to learn. And of course, you can sell it on an international market. So it can make you rich. If you make a new game, I think gamification is the key word. what we should use nowadays to make the situation easier. In this case, students will feel not overwhelmed, but they're playing. Regarding reading, what Gergely was also talking about, students don't like to read nowadays. I mean, they don't like to read books, but they read the Facebook, they read game instructions and so on. So if we use games instead of something awful learning material, it helps everybody, I think, for the teachers as well.
Yes, no, thanks, Janos. And I think it also somewhat answers a question that we received from Sophia Mavridi about what designers of online learning courses can take into consideration. And I think gamification is definitely one of the things to make it more engaging. I see there's another comment from Michelle Hunter, which is on point. We should not mix our words, right? So there is distance or remote learning, as she clarifies here in the comments, and there's distance learning. Do any of you want to talk to that nuance in terms of you can get a rich experience from both? We can start with you, Emma.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think the way that we are learning now, you know, online and at a distance, remote learning, all of this, I think it's all in a state of flux. And I don't know, I think we're going to come across different interpretations of what this kind of learning means. And so, you know, I'm sure there is probably a distinction between distance learning and remote learning, but I would say as a non-specialist, I just, you know, I'd put it all into one pot, I guess, and that's probably wrong, but you know, that's how I would see it. So I think, you know, I know distance learning in terms of you can do a qualification at a distance, and that's been around for a long time. I think the way things are moving now is that learning has to become a lot more engaging. It has to include a lot more connection. That's what people crave, is connection. We have to be more creative in what we're providing to learners. I've had to learn very, very quickly how to turn experiential learning, which relies on being face-to-face, how to turn that into something which is engaging online. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I guess, you know, when we're talking about this, what we're going to come up against is that actually people won't necessarily know what the difference is. They're just going to lump it into one pot.
Right, right.
Yeah, I'm also, you know, it just came to my mind that, you know, this sounds all very good, but in the current situation, we all lecturers had to, like, you know, develop material or adapt to this on the fly. So there was no time to produce material, to maybe not even think about, like, how do I make my course more interesting or more attractive to students. So I think in the next months and years, we might take the time to design this properly. But I think right now, what I saw was, it was a lot of things were very improvised. Just, you know, quickly do something, and everyone did the best they could. But it would be very beneficial if we you know, could do this like in a more planned or organized way. And I think this is the task for the future.
Right. I want to actually stick with you a little bit, Gergely, and I want to bring it back to the psychology of all of this, whether it's distant or remote learning or emergency remote learning. For the most part, uncertainty has been a major factor during this pandemic time. And it seems to me that that's also a mindset thing, and the techniques that you can use to manage uncertainty. Of course, it's exacerbated now during this pandemic, but what exercises do you typically, or how do you counsel someone who's struggling to deal with uncertain outcomes in their lives, or as a result of distance learning, or whichever?
Well, I think the question is about control, isn't it? So which are the fields in my life, which are the areas of my life, which are the activities that I can control?
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's you can work with whatever aesthetics you like, a list, a mind map, writing, as Emma Sue and Janos mentioned as well. Writing is so important. So write down the areas that I can control and that I can't control. Like, for example, the coronavirus. I can't control the coronavirus. I can't see it. I don't even know where it is. So partial that out of your life, because that's of no use. I had students who spent several hours a day reading about the coronavirus. They became like expert virologists. But of course, this was, to no avail, because they still couldn't control it. It's an illusion that you can control these things just by reading about them. So just scrutinize what can I control in my life. And there is always, the last thing that you can control is your breath. This is always possible. And so why don't you start with that, and then spread out, what else can I control? And just, it's more than people usually think, in fact. And so this is, I think, the way to deal with uncertainty. But yes, indeed, as you mentioned, it's also seems to be a personality trait, yes. And some people can deal with uncertainty better than others, but everyone can to a certain extent, but sure.
100%, completely agree. I think it's also part of the human condition in many respects to want to control things, but I think it can be managed for sure. I'm still completely shocked at how time has flown by. We've got to start moving towards wrapping up. So then I will probably ask a couple of you to maybe just give some closing remarks. We can start with you, Emma Sue, and then Janos, and we can go back to Gerke.
I think I just want to touch on this whole thing about control, since that was the last thing we were talking about, because it links with being proactive. And, when we are very upset by change and uncertainty, and that we don't have control, what tends to happen is we will put our energy into the things we can't control. And by energy, what I mean by that is we'll talk about it. We'll post on social media about it all the time. We'll have conversations about it. It takes up our headspace. We consume news that's far too much news. So we're putting a lot of energy into the stuff that we can't control. And it's very, very tempting to do that. Okay, it's a natural thing that you want to do that because we have such a desire to control. But if we can be aware of that first, be aware, okay, off I go again, putting my energy where I don't need to put it, and bring it back into what can I can control what I do, what I read, how I behave, my thoughts, my actions, how I look after myself. There is all that within your control. And then you focus on those little baby steps. And the minute you do that, the great thing about being proactive is the minute you are proactive, the minute you put your energy into what you can control, you feel better immediately. That's why it's so great to do that.
Fantastic. And you, Janos, any closing remarks?
Yes, I think one of the most important key expressions regarding this pandemic outbreak is human connection. And probably this outbreak will remind us how human connections are important in our life. So instead of traveling, let's say from home to workplace, we should call somebody who is important and we didn't call him or her for a long time. Just tell him or her that you are important in my life. And now I realize how important you are. In the desert, when somebody doesn't have water, we'll appreciate the water, even a drop of water. Now we appreciate probably much more human connections than before. So this is definitely one of the advantages of the situation. Let's use it.
Fantastic. Thanks for those closing remarks. Gerge, you want to just add on to your last comment?
Yes, I think what just came to my mind is how important sharing knowledge is. And it was so good for me to see the questions and also to listen to Emma Sue and to Janos, because so far, when you go to a university anywhere in the world, probably it will look more or less the same traditionally. But right now, I feel that a lot of lecturers and professors and people in charge, even us as counselors, we started to do our own little thing and figure out for ourselves how this can go. But I think sharing these experiences will be so important, so that in the future, because this will increase the amount of knowledge and this will inspire people. right now, this is what frightened me a bit during these 3 or 4 months, that like, all of a sudden everyone, and this maybe resonates a bit to what Janusz just said, everyone just, became isolated, and of course, because this is survival, I have to figure out what do I do? How do I get my students to work, to listen to me, to what I have to say on my course? But I think after this period, it's so important to like share our knowledge, share our experiences, and develop good and best practices around this. Because this is what was done centuries ago, and this is what to get back to my first thought, like this is what was done centuries ago, and this is why all the universities in the world look more or less the same.
Yes. Yes. Now, on that note, I think, out of respect for everybody's time, and I think we are literally on the dot, I just want to say thank you guys for joining us for this webinar. I reckon we've covered a lot of ground. We spoke about, just a quick wrap up, we spoke about the common psychological challenges that many people, so students, teachers alike, that could continue to face during these times. Our guests today gave a lot of advice, and we spoke about solutions and actual exercises, simple exercises that you can do to better manage things and be more adaptable, manage your stress, resilience, be proactive, etc., etc. And if you do this, you can definitely achieve a rich learning experience with distance learning or remote learning. Right? To give you some concrete examples, we spoke about relaxation, gratitude stones. That seemed to be a popular one, judging from you guys' comments in the chat section. We spoke about constructive worrying, journaling, the power of that, controlling and uncertainty and the relationship between the two. And of course, there was also the human connection. And as Gerge rightly pointed out, there was the sharing of knowledge, which is equally important. Yeah. So we want to know, how do you think about the situation? Is extremely important. Do you agree with what our guests were talking about today? Do you think some of these techniques and methods that you just heard about would be useful for you? Really, please let us know. We want to know what you guys think. You can write to us. You can share your comments on the social media pages. And we want to know your feedback. So yes, on that note, I'd like to just say thanks to our panelists, Emosu, Gerge, and Janusz, for your time and for sharing your insights. We appreciate it. And
thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
if you want to get in touch with them, yes, you can obviously Google them. Everyone's online these days, but we're also going to provide some of their details in the description section when we post this video. So yes, as you exit the webinar, you'll see a little survey pop up. We will ask you just to please give us some feedback there. Really want to talk about topics that are of interest to you. And yes, if you have some dormant time over the summer period, please get in touch with us, because we're also looking for volunteers. You'll see a page on our website that's dedicated to anyone who wants to help us with graphics design, video editing, or any sort of initiative that we got going on. So please do reach out to us. So yes, thank you everybody once again. We try to address as many questions as possible, but the time is always a scarce resource. So yes, thank you again, and take care. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.